Fair enough. I think obviously if you're looking at that which is systemically contradictory and then the doctrines of each faith, you raise a legitimate question. The doctrine of the Trinity, which it talks about, one being and yet three persons in the Godhead. So let me try and illustrate this as best as I can, because this, I think, is that this touches the nerve of the heart of what the Christian faith is all about. C.S. Lewis, in one of his books, talks precisely about this analogical comparison between God and human beings. And he says if you take a dimension in life and add a second dimension to it, then a third dimension to it, he said with each added dimension, you have greater capacity and greater possibilities of that which can be actualized. If you take one dimension, you get a straight line. You take two dimensions, you get a figure. You take a third dimension, you can get objects. And he said when you break these dimensions down, the fundamental components remain the same, but the accretion of those components give you greater possibilities. So when you've got a finite being and a contingent being and a limited being, you've got one dimension in which you're describing the very nature of being. You add to that now the possibility of an infinite being, an uncaused being, and a being that is non-dependent. You get the possibility of a being with greater complexity. And the illustration I like to give to you is this. It is not even so much that you start from the end nature of God and come down here. You start from where we are to understand what this might be. Fishermen knew there was a difference between 1 and 3. Paul the rabbi knew there was a difference between 1 and 3. Luke the physician knew there was a difference between 1 and 3. These are not kind of airheads floating around trying to posit a new kind of a concept to give a mathematical incongruity here. What they are talking about is that in the complexity of the very being of God, there is an I-you relationship within the Godhead. Now, to go from where we are to where God is, I think it is critical we follow this kind of reasoning here. It is this. The greatest search for philosophy of all time has been the search for unity and diversity. The greatest search has been for unity and diversity. The early Greek philosophers were looking at it, and then out comes somebody with 4 unities, earth, air, water, and fire. So his student comes on the scene and says, wait a minute, those are 4, not 1. So we coined the word quintessence. What is the 5th essence that unites these 4 essences? The word university, to find unity in diversity. On every American coin, e pluribus unum. Out of the multiplicity, you find 1. Now, how do we explain unity and diversity in the effect, which is what this world is? You and I are part of the effect. We've got unity and diversity in the effect of this universe. The only way to explain unity and diversity in the effect is if you've got unity and diversity in the first cause, and only in the Trinity is there unity and diversity in the community of the Trinity. If you do not grant that, you actually have even a bigger problem to deal with. For example, in the Islamic concept of God, which is a monadic concept of Allah, and they, of course, repeatedly throw against the Christian this attitude that we've got a plurality of gods, we've got a plurality of gods. That is not so. The Lord your God is one. In the complexity of the Trinity, there is an I, you, and a relationship in the Godhead himself. If you've got a monadic concept of God apart from the Trinity, then you end up with another philosophical problem. If God ever says he loves, who was he loving before the creation? If God says he speaks, who was he speaking to before the creation? So communication and affection or love is contained in the Godhead right from the beginning. Where God speaks in the community of the Trinity, where God loves, in the Christian faith only does love precede life. In every other faith, life precedes love. So we end up defining love on our terms. There is no referent against it. But if you see the love expressed within the concept of the Trinity, and Jesus' prayer was that you and I may be one, even as he and the Father are one. All I will say to you, as Mortimer Adler, the great Jewish philosopher who was a latecomer to Christ, said, there will have to be majesty and mystery in God himself. And he says, to me, the mystery of the Trinity is a revelation of how God is complete in himself, in one being, the three persons as they relate in love and in language. No sophisticated mathematician need to tell the four writers of the Gospels that 1 and 3 are not the same. And yet they were hard and purposeful in the reflection of what the doctrine of the Trinity is all about.